For this project, I've chosen ash wood for its figure, its stripes, its grain, and its ability to accept dye very well and color. I've pre-rounded the blank, drilled a hole for my woodworm screw, and mounted it to my chuck. Please be safe at all times while wood turning. Here I use a 3/8 bowl gouge to rough the outside of the bowl. I also will make a recessed dovetail for my chuck jaws. And here's my magically appearing tool rest. Now I'll just measure my tool rest height and cut the recess out. Here I use a 1-inch skew to even out the bottom of the recess and to make my dovetail. Then I switch back to my bowl gouge and shape the outside of the bowl. I'll then switch to my carbide finishing tool that I made in another video if you're interested, to finish shaping the outside of the bowl. This tool works great. Now on to everybody's favorite, sanding. I'll start with 150 and move my way up to about 400 or 600 depending on the feel. Here is my friction polish, which I will use as a sanding sealer to seal the wood. I use several coats of this friction polish to saturate the wood before buffing it dry. And here I am buffing it dry. I run my lathe about 2,000 RPMs when buffing. Now I'll use my bowl gouge to core the inside of the bowl out. And now, sanding. Up to about 400 or 600 grit, the same as the bottom of the bowl. However, the inside of the bowl required me to add some power sanding to make sure that it is completely smooth and without any imperfections. If you don't smooth out all of the imperfections, flaws such as the two that you see here will show up dark in the dyeing process, as any scratches from sanding will also show up, so you have to make sure that your surface is free of imperfections. Here I'm using the friction polish that I used earlier on the back side of the bowl, but on the inside of the bowl now. The friction polish will even out the dye and help to prevent any blotchiness. I'll also use the same number of coats as the back of the bowl, then I'll buff it dry. Now we're on to the first step in the dyeing process. Boy, that sounds funny. I'm using alcohol-based dyes by Artisan. I'm applying a blue dye to the inside of the bowl only with the lathe off. Make sure the dye does not get too close to the rim of the bowl or it will bleed into the other side of the bowl. I favor paper towels for applying dye. Also, don't forget to protect your lathe during the dyeing process, or you might end up with a blue lathe. Just to note too, the more dye you apply, the darker the color will get. You can always use alcohol or mineral spirits to remove any mistakes, but you'll have to start over and reapply the friction polish. Next, I turn the lathe on to about 2000 RPMs and use a dry paper towel to buff the dye finish, thereby creating heat to make the alcohol evaporate and dry. I'll basically keep doing this step until there's hardly any blue on the paper towel. Now I'm using a silver gilder's paste to eventually accent the stripes of the ash wood grain. You can apply gilder's paste or gilt cream or any colored wax with a paper towel, but I prefer to apply it by hand to push the paste into the pores more. As with the blue dye, I don't apply the initial coat right up to the edge. Instead, I apply a clean line later by hand turning the bowl. I allow the gilder's paste to harden for about 15 minutes. I probably should wait longer, but I can't take the suspense. This is also the step where you take all your hard work and just cover it up with silver paste. I then use some of this denatured alcohol to remove the gilder's paste. You have to press lightly or you might inadvertently remove the entire finish. Then I use a dry paper towel to buff for a few seconds to burn off the alcohol and make sure that it is completely dry for the next step. Here I'll apply the aqua green dye over the blue and the silver layers while the lathe is running. This helps to ensure an even, thin coat of the aqua green dye over the other two coats. Also, be extra careful when wearing rubber gloves to not get it caught anywhere on the bowl. I then buff the finish again with a dry paper towel and clean up any dye or gilt paste that ran over the edge with some sandpaper. You'll also need to reapply the friction polish on the edge where you sanded, or you can skip this step if your rim is nice and clean cut. And you can see here we have almost a finished product. You can see a bit of the silver popping through some of the stripes and some blue and green. And for the final step, I will spray anywhere from 4 to 7 coats of gloss lacquer. I used the Def brand here in an aerosol can. And here is the final product. You can see some of the silver accents embedded in the grain of wood with the blue and the green swirls. The sky is the limit. Have fun and keep experimenting with color combinations. The possibilities are endless.